They lied. They killed. They thought they'd get away with it. But when the verdict drops, the masks come off. From icy stares to full-blown breakdowns, these 5 women shocked the world with their crimes. And now, they're facing sentences they never saw coming. Let's begin. Starting with the case of Megan Boswell, who was, by most accounts, a young mother trying to make the best of a complicated life. Just 18 years old when she gave birth to her daughter, Evelyn Mae Boswell, Megan often posted smiling selfies, seemingly content with her new role as a parent. To friends and acquaintances, she appeared sweet, quiet, a little shy, but well-meaning. Living in rural East Tennessee, she was a familiar face in the small community of Sullivan County, where everyone knew someone who knew Megan. On social media, she portrayed a life of young motherhood, baby photos, playful captions, and declarations of love. Evelyn, with her bright blue eyes and dimpled smile, was the center of Megan's world, or so it seemed. For many who knew her only through a screen, Megan looked like a girl caught between adolescence and adulthood, navigating the chaos with a baby on her hip and a forced smile on her face. But behind the curated photos and shallow updates, something darker was brewing. Megan was estranged from Evelyn's father and was living under unstable conditions, bouncing between homes and family members. Her relationship with her parents was complicated, marked by control, resentment, and manipulation. There were rumors that Megan wasn't the one primarily caring for Evelyn. Some said it was Megan's mother, Angela, who did most of the parenting. Others whispered about jealousy, about Megan's bitterness toward how much attention Evelyn received from others. Beneath the surface of motherly devotion, cracks began to show, strange statements, shifting stories. On February 18th, 2020, an Amber Alert was issued for 15-month-old Evelyn Mae Boswell. Authorities were stunned to learn that Evelyn hadn't been seen by family members since December, nearly 2 months prior. The alert spread like wildfire. Photos of Evelyn flooded news channels, social media, and television broadcasts. "Where is Evelyn?" became the desperate cry of a community hoping for a safe return. But the case was already off kilter. Megan, Evelyn's mother, was the last known person to have seen her, and she hadn't reported her missing. Instead, it was Evelyn's grandfather who eventually raised the alarm after being denied access to the child. In every media interview that followed, Megan's story changed. Evelyn was with her father. No, she was with a babysitter. Wait, maybe she was with her grandmother. Her inconsistencies deepened the mystery and then sharpened it into suspicion. The country watched in collective horror as investigators scrambled to locate the child. Public outcry intensified with every new revelation. Why hadn't Megan reported Evelyn missing? Why couldn't she give a straight answer? The Sullivan County Sheriff's Office began a painstaking search across the region, combing through properties, ponds, and fields. Meanwhile, Megan gave television interviews that only raised more eyebrows. She cried at odd moments, smirked through others. She claimed she was being cooperative, that she loved her daughter, and just wanted her found. But for those watching closely, the emotional disconnect was jarring. Something didn't add up. As authorities dug deeper, they uncovered a family mired in dysfunction. Megan's relationship with Evelyn's father was strained and distant. She was unemployed, unstable, and dependent on various family members for housing. She also seemed to have a compulsive need to control the narrative. At one point, Megan told investigators she couldn't take a polygraph test because she was pregnant. That claim turned out to be a lie. Each new day brought more contradictions. She was arrested for making false reports, but refused to offer any real explanation for her daughter's disappearance. Behind the lies, there was a chilling silence. No heartfelt pleas to the kidnapper. No candlelight vigils were initiated by the mother. Just a series of confusing statements and bizarre behavior that left even seasoned investigators disturbed. On March 6, 2020, authorities made a heartbreaking discovery. In a small shed on a rural property owned by a family member, they found the remains of Evelyn Mae Boswell. The 15-month-old had been wrapped in aluminum foil, stuffed inside a trash bin, and concealed with clothing and toys. The cause of death: asphyxiation. Megan Boswell was charged with her daughter's murder. What began as a missing child case has now transformed into something unspeakably cruel. Investigators said Evelyn had died weeks before the alert was ever issued. Megan, they alleged, had suffocated her child, then hid the body, lied to the police, and watched the nation beg for a girl she knew was already gone. During court proceedings, it emerged that Megan had told her boyfriend Evelyn was in safe hands and staying with her grandmother. That too was a lie. Text messages revealed Megan's jealousy over Evelyn's bond with other family members. Prosecutors painted a picture of a young mother overwhelmed by life, cornered by responsibilities she didn't want, and ultimately choosing the unthinkable. The most damning detail came from forensic analysis. Evelyn had been dead for weeks, possibly suffocated by a pillow in her sleep. There was no sign of trauma, no attempt to call for help. Megan had calmly concealed the body and moved on with her life. Megan Boswell was indicted on 19 charges, including felony murder, child abuse, and giving false information to authorities. In court, she remained stoic, sometimes expressionless. In February 2024, she was found guilty without parole. Prosecutors are pursuing the death penalty, citing the heinous nature of the crime and Megan's deliberate deception. Her legal team argues diminished capacity, mental health struggles, and lack of support. But to many, the details speak for themselves. The case ignited a nationwide firestorm. Some saw Megan as a monster, cold, calculating, unfit from the start. Others viewed her as a tragic figure, a teenage mother failed by every system around her, spiraling into desperation. Was it a crime of malice or a breakdown in someone already lost? But Megan Boswell wasn't the only mother to betray the very children she was meant to protect. Just a few years later, another case would shatter the illusion of safety inside the home, this time involving a woman who had built a brand around parenting itself. Ruby Franke was once a familiar face in the world of family vlogging. As the matriarch behind 8 Passengers, a popular YouTube channel with over 2.5 million subscribers, she projected the image of a disciplined, devout, and devoted mother. Based in Utah, her content focused on structured parenting, religious values, and raising 6 children in a tightly organized household. Ruby wasn't just a content creator, she was a lifestyle icon for thousands of viewers who admired her strong boundaries and unapologetic style. Her videos showed packed lunches, early bedtimes, strict routines, and emotional accountability talks. For many fans, it felt like real parenting in a world they saw as too soft. But behind the viral thumbnails and wholesome veneer, something deeply disturbing was festering, something that would shatter the public illusion and devastate her family. There were warning signs quietly threaded through her content. Viewers raised concerns over Ruby's harsh parenting style, taking away her son's bedroom for 7 months, sending her children to wilderness therapy programs, or using food as punishment. These red flags sparked online criticism but were often brushed off as tough love. By 2022, Ruby had teamed up with Jodi Hildebrandt, a self-proclaimed therapist and founder of a controversial program called Chronicles. The program promised to teach truth and emphasize strict obedience through what many have since called emotional manipulation and religious extremism. Ruby's content changed. Videos became colder, more dogmatic. Eventually, she disappeared from YouTube altogether, but the real nightmare was only beginning. On August 30th, 2023, a 12-year-old boy, Ruby's son, Russell Franke, escaped from Jodi Hildebrandt's residence in Evans, Utah. Emaciated and covered in wounds, he knocked on a neighbor's door pleading for food and help. Duct tape was wrapped around his ankles. His arms were lacerated. He had been starved and physically abused. Inside Hildebrandt's home, police discovered 10-year-old Eve Franke, also malnourished and in critical condition. Both children had been held in confinement for weeks. This wasn't a disciplinary method gone too far. It was torture. Ruby Franke was arrested that same day alongside Hildebrandt. The 4 older children, Sherry, Chad, Abby, and Julie, were not involved in the abuse, but were immediately placed under the protection of state welfare authorities. Shari Franke, the eldest daughter, who had long been estranged from her mother, posted one word to Instagram: finally. Media coverage exploded. Headlines like "YouTube mom arrested for child torture" trended worldwide. Fans were stunned. Critics felt vindicated, and parenting experts began publicly dissecting the methods Franke had normalized online. But the full horror was still unraveling. Investigators uncovered that the abuse had been long-running, methodical, and deeply intertwined with Hildebrandt's Connections program. Franke admitted to forcing her son to perform strenuous outdoor labor without sunscreen, water, or protective clothing, leading to severe sunburns and open wounds. Eve was coerced into jumping into a cactus multiple times, a punishment encouraged by Hildebrandt. Ruby saw her children not as individuals, but as sinners who needed correction, whatever the cost. Digital records, including video logs, private messages, and handwritten journals, revealed that the abuse was not only intentional, it was recorded and justified in writing. Ruby and Jodi exchanged messages discussing the children's behavior, labeling them as evil, deceptive, and unworthy of trust. They believed their treatment was righteous, that repentance came only through pain and obedience. They even denied food as a way to starve out the wickedness. In September 2023, both Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt were charged with 6 felony counts of aggravated child abuse. Ruby later pleaded guilty to 4 counts in February 2024 as part of a plea agreement, hoping to spare her children further trauma from testifying. In a chilling twist, one of the most damning pieces of evidence was an unreleased video in which Ruby described breaking her children's will through isolation and suffering. She didn't speak of discipline, she spoke of exorcism. This wasn't misguided parenting, it was spiritualized torture. In February 2024, Ruby Franke stood before a Utah court and was sentenced to up to 30 years in prison. Jodi Hildebrandt received the same. Both women wept during sentencing, but the judge remained unmoved, citing the calculated, cruel, and sustained nature of the abuse. The courtroom's silence was broken only by the sobs of family members, and a single phrase from Sherry Franke echoed online: "My siblings finally have a chance to be safe." Public reaction was swift and polarizing. Many were horrified not only by the abuse, but by how it was hidden behind a camera for years. Some blamed YouTube, asking why child welfare red flags weren't addressed earlier. The Connexion's program, once promoted as a self-help resource, is now under heavy scrutiny. Experts call it a cult-like system that uses religious guilt, isolation, and truth training to break people down psychologically. Parenting communities have also been shaken. Where is the line between discipline and abuse? How many other family channels might be hiding something darker? Today, the 8 Passengers channel is gone, its videos removed, its brand dismantled. Ruby Franke, once a polished parenting guru, is now nothing but a cautionary tale. While Ruby Franke used the internet to mask a slow-burning horror, Leilani Simon didn't hide behind a camera. Her deception was quieter, but the outcome was just as devastating. Leilani Simon was just 22 years old when her world and the world of those around her were shattered. On the surface, she appeared to be like so many young mothers navigating the challenging balance of parenthood and building a family. Living in a modest home in Savannah, Georgia, Leilani had 3 children, and her youngest, Quentin, was a bright-eyed 20-month-old toddler who seemed like he had so much of life ahead of him. Despite her youth, Leilani had built a life that many could relate to. Her family dynamic wasn't perfect, but like so many families, they made it work. Leilani's mother, Billie Jo Howell, played a significant role in caring for Quentin and his older brother. Though not perfect, they were a family united by the everyday struggles and joys of life. But behind the familiar front of this seemingly average family lay something much darker, something that would ultimately shatter the illusion of safety that so many associate with home. From the outside, things seemed like they could be fixed with a little time and effort, but in reality, Leilani had a history of instability, substance abuse, erratic behavior, and a turbulent home life plagued her from a young age. She had been involved in numerous incidents with law enforcement, some of which involved her children. Leilani was unemployed, and at the time of Quentin's death, her mother, Billie Jo, had legal custody of Quentin due to concerns about Leilani's ability to properly care for him. Yet, the system failed to predict the true extent of the tragedy that would soon unfold. Leilani's issues weren't just personal, they were part of a dangerous pattern. And on the morning of October 5th, 2022, everything came to a head. That day, by 9 a.m. it became clear that something was wrong. Leilani called 911, claiming that her 20-month-old son, Quentin, had disappeared from his playpen sometime during the night. She sounded frantic, a mother in distress, searching for answers that she claimed were beyond her understanding. Quentin was last seen around 6 p.m. the evening before, and by morning, he was gone. Leilani's frantic call triggered a massive search operation. Police, FBI agents, helicopters, and search dogs descended on Savannah, scouring the area for any sign of the missing toddler. There was no sign of forced entry into the home, no trace of Quentin outside, and no witnesses to his disappearance. What followed was a desperate attempt to locate a child who seemed to vanish into thin air, but in reality, the truth would soon come out. As the search continued, the public's sympathy poured out for the missing child. Candlelight vigils, social media posts, and community efforts to find Quentin grew stronger with each passing day. Leilani made brief public appearances, her statements full of uncertainty and concern. She thanked those helping in the search, but something was unsettling about her demeanor, a detachment, a lack of urgency. For more than a week, the case continued to unfold as a mystery. Police were working tirelessly, but the case wasn't adding up. As the investigation progressed, the narrative shifted. On October 12th, the FBI began to publicly question whether Quentin was still alive. The situation went from a missing child to something far more sinister. In the days that followed, police began to hone in on Leilani. The inconsistencies in her statements began to raise red flags. Her story had changed multiple times, and certain details didn't align with the timeline or the evidence collected. Investigators started to look closer at the events surrounding Quentin's disappearance. And then, a key development: surveillance footage and cell phone records. These led authorities to believe that Leilani was the last person with Quentin, and that she had, in fact, discarded his body, dumping him in a dumpster behind a mobile home park. The investigation had already shifted from a search for a missing child to the grim task of recovering a body. By November 18th, 2022, the truth could no longer be denied. Quentin's remains were found at a landfill. The body, severely decomposed, was identified through DNA testing. It was clear that this wasn't just a tragic accident. Quentin had been deliberately killed. The case was now fully in the realm of murder. Further investigation revealed that Quentin had suffered blunt force trauma. This wasn't a tragic disappearance. It was the intentional killing of a helpless child. The authorities soon released details that confirmed Leilani's involvement. Her movements had been tracked. Her cell phone pings corroborated with the timeline of Quentin's disappearance. Investigators believed that she had murdered her son, then placed his body in a dumpster, where it would eventually be discarded into a landfill. On November 21st, 2022, Leilani Simon was arrested. She was charged with murder, felony murder, concealing a death, and making false statements to law enforcement. Her arrest was the turning point, the moment when everything became clear. Leilani's lies had unraveled. There was no abduction, no mysterious stranger. Quentin had not simply wandered off. Leilani had killed her child and, in a chilling display of cold-heartedness, had disposed of his body like trash. This marked the moment when the community stopped searching for a missing child and began preparing for the trial of a mother who had betrayed the very trust that parents are given by default. In 2024, Leilani Simon pleaded guilty to the murder of her son, Quentin. The guilty plea spared the public from further traumatizing details during a trial, but it did not change the heartbreak caused by her actions. Leilani was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for concealing her son's death. The courtroom was filled with emotion. Some felt relief that justice was served, while others were consumed by a profound sadness that a mother could commit such an unthinkable act. The case sparked intense debates, both on a legal and societal level. How could a mother do this to her child? Was Leilani a monster, or was she the product of a broken system, marked by years of neglect, addiction, and dysfunction? While some believed Leilani's past struggles had played a part in her actions, others focused on the irreparable damage done to a young child who was given no chance at a safe, loving life. Public opinion was divided, and Quentin's death remained a painful reminder of the dark reality that some children face behind closed doors. But Leilani Simon's story wasn't the end of this tragic pattern, because just months earlier, across the country in a quiet Arizona suburb, another mother would commit an act so chilling it felt almost surreal. Yui Ino was a quiet and unremarkable woman. At 44 years old, she lived in Tempe, Arizona, and was known primarily for being a mother to two young children, 9-year-old Mia and 7-year-old Kai. She wasn't active on social media, didn't post daily updates or curated family photos, and didn't seek attention. Neighbors rarely heard noise from her home. She came across as an average, if somewhat reserved, single mother going through the challenges of divorce. To many, Ino's life seemed like a common, if difficult, chapter of modern family life. Custody negotiations, financial pressure, and trying to keep her children's world stable. Nothing stood out, but that's precisely what makes what happened next so jarring. Beneath the surface of Yui Ino's quiet life, however, was a storm no one had fully seen or perhaps had chosen to overlook. She had been previously investigated by Arizona's Department of Child Services for neglect, but no immediate action was taken. There were signs of strain. The family was in the middle of a messy divorce, and according to court documents, there had been growing tension tension between Inoue and her estranged husband, particularly over money. Inoue had also begun making concerning statements. She told acquaintances that she was hearing voices, yet no psychological intervention took place. No red flag triggered a meaningful investigation. The voices remained unchecked, and soon they would guide her to unthinkable violence. It was the early morning hours of May 15th, 2021, when police in Tempe received a chilling 911 call. The woman on the line, later identified as Yui Ino, sounded disoriented, speaking in fragments. Officers arrived at her apartment just after 7 a.m. Inside the apartment, they found what would later be described as a scene of horror. Mia and Kai lay motionless, their small bodies showing clear signs of violent trauma. Investigators would later confirm they had been killed using a meat cleaver. Both children had sustained multiple injuries, including amputations and deep defensive wounds, indicating they had tried to fight back. Inoue was arrested at the scene. She had superficial injuries, blood on her hands and clothing, and she offered a confession that was both simple and terrifying. She had killed her children because the voices told her to. News of the double homicide sent shockwaves through the Tempe community. Residents couldn't reconcile the image of a soft-spoken, seemingly passive woman with the brutality of the murders. Initial media reports focused on mental illness, with headlines emphasizing that Inoue had heard voices and was possibly experiencing a psychotic break. It created a blurry, tragic picture. Was this a mother in desperate need of help, or someone hiding dark intent? The children's father was devastated. In court and media interviews, he described his children as happy, loving, and full of life. They had just spent time with him days earlier, and now they were gone. The story took a turn when prosecutors revealed what they believed to be the real motive. Not mental illness, but revenge. Inoue and her husband were in the throes of a bitter divorce, and financial disputes had grown heated in the weeks leading up to the killings. According to prosecutors, the murders were not sudden or spontaneous. They were acts of retaliation. Evidence pointed to a deep resentment toward her husband, and the children heartbreakingly became pawns in that emotional war. While Inoue's mental health was still a factor, the prosecution argued it wasn't the root cause. They painted a far darker picture of intent, manipulation, and rage. Forensic evidence solidified the horror of the scene. Blood patterns, the wounds on the children, and the state of the apartment all indicated prolonged violence. The cleaver had been retrieved from the kitchen, a choice that signaled preparation, not impulse. There was no evidence of forced entry or a third-party attacker. Inao's statements shifted multiple times. At one point, she said she didn't remember anything. At another, she said voices had taken over her body. At yet another, she claimed to have blacked out entirely. Still, the clearest piece of evidence came from her own words in that 911 call. "I killed my children." The most decisive moment came when the court revealed that Inoue had waived her right to be present during her trial. This unusual choice allowed the trial to proceed largely without her. It felt to many like an admission, not just of guilt, but of complete emotional detachment. With overwhelming forensic and testimonial evidence, the jury found her guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, child abuse, and disorderly conduct. The question was no longer if she had committed the crime, but why? And in the absence of a coherent explanation, the act seemed more chilling than ever. Yui Ino was found guilty on all counts in 2024. Sentencing is scheduled for May 2025. Prosecutors are expected to seek the maximum life sentence without parole. In a brief court appearance before sentencing was delayed, Ino remained silent. She showed no emotion, no remorse. Her defense team continued to push for a psychiatric evaluation, but the jury had already drawn its conclusion. This was a deliberate, premeditated act. The courtroom was filled with grief and disbelief, family members sobbing, attorneys struggling to find words, and a community trying to understand what had driven a mother to such extremes. The public response to the case was immediate and deeply divided. Some saw Inoue as a mentally ill woman failed by the system. Others viewed her as a manipulative parent who used the language of illness to deflect responsibility. Mental health advocates pointed to the need for early intervention and better resources for those reporting auditory hallucinations. Critics of Arizona's Child Protective Services questioned how earlier signs of neglect hadn't resulted in the removal of the children. At the heart of the debate were 2 innocent children, lives lost not just to violence, but possibly to years of warning signs left unheeded. As the community awaits Yui Inoue's formal sentencing, there are more questions than answers. Was this a mental breakdown that spiraled out of control, or was it a calculated act masked by insanity? And as May 2025 approaches, one thing remains certain: justice for Mia and Kai may finally be near, but the wounds they left behind will take far longer to heal. But Yui Ino wasn't the only mother to claim she was guided by voices. Another woman, once a seemingly loving parent and devout believer, would take that delusion to an entirely new level. Lorie Valow once appeared to be a model mother and suburban woman, attractive, charismatic, and deeply devoted to her faith. She was known among friends as a loving mom who doted on her children and took pride in being spiritually grounded. She had lived in several states and had a large blended family. Her youngest, Joshua J.J. Valow, was a bright-eyed 7-year-old with autism whom she and her late husband had adopted. Her daughter, Tylee Ryan, 16, was strong-willed, fiercely protective of JJ, and known for her sarcastic humor. To neighbors and churchgoers, Lorie's life seemed like a spiritual journey guided by faith and family. She was involved in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and often spoke about preparing for the future in deeply religious terms. But behind the scenes, a storm was brewing, one that would end in the deaths of multiple people and a nationwide search for 2 missing children. Those closest to Lorie began noticing alarming changes in her behavior. As early as 2018, she became obsessed with apocalyptic beliefs, convinced that the world would end soon. Her ideas shifted from traditional religious doctrine to something more extreme. She believed she had lived many past lives, that she was chosen by God for a special purpose, and that some people were no longer real. Rather, they had become dark spirits or zombies that needed to be destroyed. When Lorie met Chad Daybell, a fringe author of end times fiction, their beliefs merged into a dangerous cocktail. Chad claimed he could see people's spiritual light or darkness, and that Lorie had a divine mission. Together, they constructed a delusional world in which murder became a spiritual necessity. The breaking point came in the fall of 2019. Lorie had moved her children to Rexburg, Idaho, where Chad lived. On September 8th, 2019, Tylee Ryan was last seen during a family outing to Yellowstone National Park. Just 2 weeks later, on September 23rd, J.J. Valow vanished. Lorie offered no explanation to family members who asked where the children were, often claiming they were safe and with friends, even as school officials reported J.J.'s unexplained absences. By October, Chad's longtime wife, Tammy Daybell, mysteriously died in her sleep. Just 2 weeks later, Chad and Lorie were married on a beach in Hawaii. Meanwhile, JJ and Tylee were still nowhere to be found. What had once appeared to be an unconventional but devout family now looked like something far darker. The children's disappearances triggered an intense media and law enforcement response. Authorities in multiple states, Arizona, Idaho, and Hawaii, scrambled to piece together timelines, statements, and strange connections. As police questioned Lorie about her missing children, she continued lying, saying they were safe and simply not available. All the while, she lived freely in Hawaii with Chad. Lorie's family, especially her surviving son Colby Ryan, begged for answers. The public became fixated on the case, baffled by the couple's lack of emotion and apparent indifference. The once loving mother now looked cold, evasive, and disturbingly detached. As investigators dug deeper, a disturbing pattern of death and manipulation emerged. Lorie's 4th husband, Charles Valow, had been shot and killed by her brother Alex Cox in July 2019. Alex claimed self-defense. Lorie didn't grieve. She threw a pool party the same day. Chad's wife Tammy had died under suspicious circumstances, and only after pressure from the public was her body exhumed. Lorie's behavior continued to raise red flags. She never reported her children missing. She didn't try to find them, and every path led to more lies, more inconsistencies, and more deaths. The turning point came in June 2020. After months of silence and mounting pressure, authorities searched Chad Daybell's backyard. There, buried under a layer of sod and stone, they discovered JJ's body, wrapped in plastic, bound with duct tape. Not far away, they found the remains of Tylee, dismembered and burned. The discovery shattered the nation. It proved what many feared, but hoped wasn't true. The children were dead, and their killers had buried them in plain sight. The findings transformed the case from a parental disappearance into a double homicide, one wrapped in religious extremism, deceit, and premeditated murder. In May 2023, Lorie Valow Daybell was convicted of first-degree murder in the deaths of JJ and Tylee, as well as conspiracy in the death of Tammy Daybell. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of a woman who believed she was a godlike figure, above the law, justified in killing her own children because she thought their spirits were dark. At sentencing, the judge called Lorie's actions the most evil and selfish crimes he had ever seen. She was given life in prison without the possibility of parole, and yet she showed no remorse, insisting in court that her children were happy and waiting for her in heaven. The verdict brought closure to some, but raised deeper questions for others. Lorie was sentenced in July 2023, but her legal journey didn't end there. As of 2025, she is back in court, this time in Arizona, facing charges for conspiring to murder her fourth husband, Charles Valow. She's representing herself in the trial, insisting that her previous convictions were the result of mental illness and legal misconduct. In June 2025, she is scheduled to stand trial again, this time for her alleged role in the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux, the ex-husband of her niece, who was reportedly targeted as part of the same zombie narrative. Public reaction to Lorie's story has been intense and deeply polarized. Some see her as a cold-blooded killer who used religion as a mask for murder. Others blame Chad Daybell for manipulating her with doomsday cult rhetoric. A smaller, more conflicted group wonders if mental illness and years of trauma played a larger role than the courts acknowledged. What's undeniable is how Lorie's descent into extremism turned lethal. It challenged public perceptions of faith, motherhood, and how far belief can be weaponized. Lorie Valow Daybell now sits in an Idaho prison, her future locked behind bars, but her name continues to echo through headlines, books, and documentaries. She is not done fighting. Her legal team has filed an appeal to the Idaho Supreme Court, claiming her rights were violated and that she was not mentally competent to stand trial. The children she once claimed to love were reduced to victims in a story that feels too surreal to be true, and yet it is. A tragic blend of delusion, power, and religious extremism created one of the most haunting family murder cases in recent American history. But even in a courtroom, even with a sentence, some questions never get answered. If you were shocked by the chilling stories of these evil women and their devastating sentences, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay updated on the latest true crime cases. Leave us a comment below. What do you think about these women's actions? Do you think justice was served, or is there more to the story? We'd love to hear your thoughts.